workshop. It's Self-Care 101 for library leaders, managing stress, battling burnout and vicarious trauma, and promoting mental health for you and your staff. An awesome topic. Really looking forward to learning from Dawn. And I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Dawn, so we get your full presentation time.
As you can tell by the title, we have a lot of stuff to cover. So,
yeah.
So let's see, let me do my thing here. Okay, so like she mentioned, I'm Dawn Barron. I'm an instruction and outreach librarian at Lenore Run University. That's in Hickory. And I'm a master's level psychologist. I've been a licensed psychological associate for a long time, and I'm a second career librarian. So I'm able to use some of my mental health skills as a librarian too. So that's been a nice mix for me. So I'm still in private practice. 1 day a week, I do psychological evaluations for children and adults. So that's kind of my background about me. I do have my personal email here if anybody wants to ask or tell me anything after the session, if there's anything you want to mention that you didn't get a chance to. And so just some learning objectives, what we're going to try to cover in this hour is to define self-care and why it matters for managing chronic stress, to try to differentiate burnout versus vicarious trauma versus maybe some other mental health concerns, to develop effective self-care strategies, and how to implement those strategies to support our staff and their self-care. And then finally, how to find professional help if needed. So I'm going to try to cram all this into an hour and hopefully we'll have time, but feel free if there's anything you want to mention in the chat, I'll try to keep an eye on that. But you could also unmute yourself and make comments. And so don't feel like you can't do that. So anyway, so we'll get right into this. So self-care is really just an activity that you do that's for the purpose of improving your mental, emotional, spiritual, social, physical well-being. So anything that you do for that counts as self-care. And as we're talking about, let's see my slides, self-care, we're really taking a holistic perspective on wellness. So there's lots of different things out there about self-care, and some of you may know a lot about self-care and others may not really have read up on it too much. But when we're talking about self-care, we're talking about, like I said, anything that really helps promote wellness. And so practicing self-care is linked to wellness. There's research that shows that it is. And so we're talking about, our mental well-being. So in that area, things like, our intellectual growth, our personal growth. So that can be things like reading, listening to a podcast, or doing a brain game. So that counts as mental self-care. Emotional self-care is more about like self-awareness and how do you kind of control your reaction to stresses and having healthy emotions. So that would be things like maybe reading self-help books or going to therapy, practicing gratitude. Those things would all count as emotional self-care. There's also spiritual dimensions to self-care. So your beliefs and values that really guide your life and give it meaning. And that doesn't have to be religion or going to church. It can be things like yoga, being out in nature, just reflecting on yourself. So that's all count. Social is an important part of our self-care, going out with and spending time with friends and family and having healthy relationships. And then physical is part of that too, part of that self-care. So the Department of Health and Human Services says at least 30 minutes of physical activity a day is recommended. And it doesn't have to be rigorous exercise, but getting up, moving, having some intentional movement. So all of those things together can really help promote our wellness. And there is a link here. I think you gave these slides to Amelia, but this is from the ALA and the American Psychological Association, just has some information about supporting wellness for library workers, which is what this presentation is about. So as we're talking about self-care, we have to think about, well, why would we do it? It's one of those other things we kind of need to work into our schedule. So we're thinking about stress and what impact does that have on us? And when we talk about stress, it's one of those terms people throw around, like I'm stressed, I had a stressful day. Like, what does that mean, stress? So stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. So anytime you have to adjust to something, that's technically stress. So we react with physical, mental, and emotional changes to try to address whatever that stressor is. And the thing to be aware of is that the stressor can be something that's right there, like a patron that's yelling at you, or it can even be thinking back on something or thinking about something like, oh, well, this weekend I have to da 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 da. That's stressful. There's nothing physically there, but we're still thinking and responding, and our body's got some emotional reactions to this idea of something. So we won't do this right now, but this is a link you can go to later for Mental Health America. It's just a little screener that we can kind of go through, and it gives you an idea of where you're at in terms of your stress, because it may be something that you don't check in with yourself about a whole lot, and it might be interesting just to kind of get an idea of just how stressed you might be. Another important point I make about stress is that it's not always bad. Bad things are clearly stressful, but positive events are stressful too. So again, anything we have to adjust to can be stressful. So something positive could be, getting married could be positive. The negative side of that is divorce or separation. So we can see on here for every positive thing, there's kind of a flip side of something negative and vice versa. So even though lots of wonderful things could happen in your life, you had a child, you bought a house, you got a promotion, those are all wonderful things. But you might be feeling very stressed because you're still trying to adjust to all these changes. And so we have to be aware that even positive changes can be stressful. So what is the impact of chronic stress? So chronic stress being just constantly going through, stress. It's every day. It's not just once in a while that something happens. It depends on your job too. A lot of you are administrators, and so your stress level is probably pretty high. You probably have new things you have to adjust to every single day, and lots of different areas of your life. And so as we think about chronic stress, it really does affect us in every aspect. So physically, we can have some challenges. So people might struggle with their weight. They might just lose a lot of weight or gain a lot of weight. It can affect cardiovascular, how much we get sick, stomach issues. Cognitively, people can really start to feel like they can't think clearly, they can't concentrate, their thoughts are racing. In my work as a psychologist, I pretty regularly do testing for adults who come in and want to be assessed for ADHD. And so they've never had issues as a child. Everything was fine academically, but they just feel like, there's got to be something wrong with me because I cannot remember anything. I can't stay organized. I just think I might have ADHD. And then we do the testing, and 9 times out of 10, they don't. A lot of times it's just their life stressors, or there's anxiety, depression, and it really impacts the way you can think clearly. So it does have a real impact on your functioning. Emotionally, people that have chronic stress can develop things like we mentioned, depression, anxiety, just feeling overwhelmed. And behavior-wise, people show it in their behaviors too. Their eating patterns, sleeping patterns. They might have some bad habits that kind of escalate, like drinking, smoking, and being more withdrawn than usual. So we can kind of just see across the spectrum the impact of stress. So one thing to think about with stress too is that when we do face stress, our body produces adrenaline. So that's what gives us that fight or flight response. So that sense of going to face this stressor, I'm going to either run away or fight it. And then when our body stores something called cortisol, so that's something that we store to kind of replace that energy that we lost through that adrenaline burst. So when we have stress constantly, our body is making more cortisol than we can get rid of. So basically it's accumulating. And then the chronic stress can then shrink our prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is that front part of your brain that is responsible for things like thinking clearly, planning, all those executive functioning skills. So it can actually shrink that part of your brain, so you have more trouble with memory and learning. And on the flip side of that, it increases our amygdala, which is our emotional processing center. So we kind of get into this cycle where we're just constantly more receptive to stress because of that. So we're always in that kind of constant cycle of creating that adrenaline and cortisol, and it's just kind of hard to get out of that cycle sometimes. So that's where really developing some self-care skills is essential, because the stress isn't going to stop and our body isn't going to stop responding to that. It's all it knows to do for survival. So we have to be able to do things to really mitigate the impact of that stress on ourselves. So this is another little inventory. If you ever took Psychology 101, this probably is coming back to you. It's called the Holmes Ray Scale. So this is one of those things that you can kind of look at positive and negative events. It gives it a little number so you can tally up your score of all the things that happened in the past year. And it just gives you an idea of how much at risk you might be for developing a health condition, based on the level of stress that you have. And it's not to scare you or be negative or worrisome, but it just gives you an idea of maybe I really do need to try to use some of these skills for my self-care so I can stay healthy and keep doing the things I need and want to do. So there's a little link there if you want to go through later and take a look at that for yourself. So one thing I talk about is what is stressful about being a librarian. So I know that when I went into librarianship, some of my coworkers thought, oh boy, you get to sit around and read and it's going to be so quiet. And, and it wasn't like that. I didn't really think it would be, but, there is that stereotype that librarians don't have stress, that our jobs are really maybe easy or low stress. But there are things about being a librarian that we need to acknowledge as being quite stressful. And what you can do too is if you want to put in the chat as I'm going through some of these things, you can feel free, if you feel comfortable, you can put in some things that you might think are stressful as an administrator or supervisor or just in general. So if there's things that you want to mention, feel free to do that. But some of the things that you'll read a lot about in the literature or just know from being a librarian is that our workload is very high. So we all have to do multiple job roles. Now, I doubt any of us do just one thing, so there's lots of different things that we have to do. Sometimes we're doing multiple people's jobs if positions aren't filled. The scheduling can be inflexible. The library's open when it's open and you have to do what you have to do. If you're in an academic library like I am and you're teaching classes, those are something, the classes are something you have to get to when the classes are there. You can't really flex around that. There can sometimes be unclear expectations from management. That's in any job, but just, not always being clear on what's expected of you can be stressful. Sometimes there's difficult coworkers, again, as any job, but we also face difficult patrons sometimes, patrons that really can be hard to manage or to deal with. And so that's an additional stressor for us to manage, those of us in public-facing jobs, positions particularly. And work interruptions. So that's one thing I had to get used to. I was used to having, being in my own office and making my own, to-do list and all the things I was going to do. And so as a librarian, there's lots of different changes throughout each day. You had to kind of stop and do. And that can be kind of unpredictable sometimes. And it gives you a sense that you didn't finish something sometimes. There can be changes in leadership. So lots of people are retiring or, positions are being changed. And so there can be changes in leadership at the university level, or higher level administrative positions. When those change, it can change the whole university. And so that's something we often have to adjust to. And budget cuts, we're all familiar with that. We don't quite have enough money to go around. The understaffing issue. Low pay, so we don't always get paid the most, and that can be stressful, particularly if your library is in an area that's high cost of living. That can be a stress outside of work. We don't always get a lot of recognition for what we do. We do a lot behind the scenes, and so that's not always recognized by our universities or our patrons or board of directors, whatever it may be. And we don't have a lot of control over the work environment. So it's the library, it runs the way it runs. We don't always, can't really kind of just control that. We had to work around that environment as it exists. And there can be limited opportunities to advance. There's not always room to grow, especially if you're in a smaller library, smaller staff. That's not always an option. And there have been some librarians recently that have been giving talks about low morale in the profession. I'm still very excited to be a librarian. I've always wanted to be one, so I'm really excited about it. But people who have been in the field for quite a while do sometimes develop a sense of low morale about the profession. So it's something to acknowledge and be aware of. And before we get into that, I want to look at the chat here and see what people are saying. Let's see here. So some people are saying mandates from administration regarding, so the hours, the budget changes. So all those things we just don't have any control over. Yeah. And then, maintenance issues. So we have the building issues, things that we need to get fixed, county administration. So similar to us in the university, when that changes, it changes what we're being told to do, how we're adapting to that. Several grants, active grants at once, that would be stressful, trying to find that funding. Co-workers that are not involved in annual reporting do not understand why I can't help with their projects. The second they requested, so we have annual reports here too. My part's pretty easy, but some of my co-workers have more intensive pieces to that, and it has to get done. And so you can't just stop and do something else, like you mentioned. So those annual reports can be a challenge, and trying to get co-workers to understand that you have limited time. The remote work can have different challenges, that's for sure. So it's been nice in some ways, but in other ways, it's been difficult. Yeah. And then the renovations. Okay, so lots of things there. And those are all just different things everybody's trying. Some of these we have in common, some are different based on what library type we're in. But they're all things we have to adjust to. And then we have COVID. So on top of all those things, we also have to deal with COVID. We have people that don't want to wear their mask, or we have budget cuts, or we have people that decided they don't want to work here anymore because they don't want to deal with it. So then we're understaffed. So, and we also have more of a push. I know in my university, people want those virtual resources. And we don't always have the money for that. It's hard to tell people no, that they, we can't do it. Doesn't feel good. So it's been an additional stress for sure. So with all these things, all this doom and gloom, we can talk about what does that mean in terms of burnout and vicarious trauma. I know there was another presentation today on burnout, so I'm not going to really belabor this. I just want to touch on it, just kind of review it, especially if you weren't able to go to that presentation. But burnout really is just a state of mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion that's just caused by prolonged excessive stress. So this is typically in a work environment, but not always. You can have caregiver burnout. There's different types of burnout. But this is really caused by environmental stress. So this emotionally or physically demanding work. So it's something about the work environment that is causing us to be mentally, emotionally, physically drained. So what are some signs that we might be burned out? So like I said, you probably went to another presentation on this, but saw that the physical and emotional exhaustion, you just feel really worn out. Cynicism, that's a big one, especially if you were usually a pretty upbeat person. If everything's negative, glasses half empty, you don't really feel like you care too much about, your library too much anymore, that can be a sign. And just feeling ineffective, like you're just not accomplishing anything. Those are all signs of burnout. Now, burnout, we can improve that if we can make some changes, like, job changes, take some time off, work on some environmental modifications. We can overcome that. So that's all the more reason to do the self-care, so that you have that energy to kind of come in there and say, look, these are the changes that we need to make, so that I can be productive in my job. It's really hard to make those changes if you just completely, have not been taking care of yourself, don't have the energy or the oomph to do it. So that's one reason we want to try to do these self-care activities. So vicarious trauma, that's a whole nother thing there, vicarious trauma. And I think maybe that was the one. I'm not sure if you guys had a presentation on vicarious trauma or burnout, but vicarious trauma is defined by the American Counseling Association as the emotional residue of exposure that counselors have from working with people as they're hearing trauma stories and become witnesses to the pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors have endured. So we're librarians, we're not counselors, but it's the same phenomena for us. So we also are seeing and being exposed to traumatic events in our library that can put us at risk for having kind of like a secondary vicarious trauma, so from that. So what would cause us to be at risk for this? So one thing is if we have patrons that are telling us terrible things that have happened to them. So they're telling us how they don't have housing, how there was domestic violence, how their children got taken into custody, what have you. It can be traumatizing to really hear about these things over and over again. Also, we just see that they're struggling. We see that they clearly aren't, having enough food, or they don't have a place to go when the library closes, or their children may look like they're neglected, or a child looks like it doesn't have what it needs. And those are all things that are just really hard for us to have to watch as professionals. And then, we also might witness this. We might see patrons getting physical with each other, or verbally aggressive, or even directing some of that towards us. So these are all ways that we can experience trauma as librarians, because librarians are a helping profession. So we also are at risk for this. Do you guys have any questions about vicarious trauma in general? Have you heard of this? Is this a newer topic for you? Are you familiar with it? Not sure. Some people have heard about this, and others are like, I don't know what that is. So, if you're like, well, maybe this applies to me, I'm not sure. Some signs, that maybe this is an issue for you is that, developing an altered worldview. So with burnout, we're tired, we're then kind of negative. With vicarious trauma, we really start to see the world as an unsafe place. It's not safe. It's not a good place. We don't want anything to do with it. We're not good. The world's not good. So it really changes how you see things. And then the person might have some behavioral changes. They start behaving in ways that they haven't behaved before. So maybe they're more withdrawn. Sometimes they become more risky, more impulsive, just maybe not using the same level of judgment that they would have used before. And this sense of hopelessness, like this doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do. I'm stuck in this situation. And then people with vicarious trauma can be very emotional too. So, their emotions may be up and down, and they might be real reactive to things that trigger them, things that make them think about these traumatic things. And then the hypervigilance, just never feeling safe. Like you always have to watch, if somebody comes in the library, who's that? What are they going to do? Is this, is this person going to do something? And just not being able to kind of relax and not feel like you have to always be, mindful of safety. And a big one that's really, really hard for us as librarians is that we may lose that ability to really care for others. Some people call it compassion fatigue, but just the empathy that you had, that you really cared so much, but people are going through, suddenly you just can't feel it. It's not that you don't care, you just don't feel it anymore. And that can be really hard for people to lose that sense of caring and empathy. So that's a real red flag for somebody that they might be experiencing that vicarious trauma. So unlike burnout, where we can kind of take a break and talk to our supervisor and make some changes and bounce back, hopefully, with vicarious trauma, this one takes a little more work. This might be something where therapy might be necessary, or you might have to really, really kind of do some things to take care of yourself to overcome this. This is a nice resource here, and we'll look at the chat here in a minute. The Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. This is from the Office for Victims of Crime. It has lots of resources here. So if you're thinking as a library supervisor, I'd like my staff to be aware of this. I'm concerned about my staff. Maybe they're dealing with this. These are some resources that you can share with them and kind of open up that conversation or make them think, well, maybe they may not even be aware this is happening, or if this is why they're feeling this way. So being able to share that resource would be a nice tool for them just to consider whether that might apply to them. I'm going to take a look at the chat here. I was just rattling on here, see what people are saying. So some people have heard of it. Other people, it's a new topic. Okay, other people have researched it. So lots of different things. And trauma, we're going to talk about trauma in general. Yeah, and I do believe it's a term that has become overused. So that's one of those things we're going to talk about when we get to the section about differentiating mental health concerns. We'll definitely talk about PTSD and trauma. So this is exactly where we are now. We're like, okay, maybe we have burnout. Maybe there's some vicarious trauma. Maybe there's a mental illness there, mental disorder, something like depression, anxiety, PTSD. Some of those things might be things that you just have, otherwise it may be brought about by burnout, vicarious trauma. So it's hard to tell, and it doesn't always matter, chicken or the egg kind of thing. But some of these things that people are dealing with may become a mental disorder that kind of needs to be addressed. And this could be in yourself or your staff, what have you. So any kind of, mental illness, mental disorder, we can use those terms interchangeable. The thing that makes something a disorder is that it really causes impairment in functioning. So this is at work, socially, if you're in school and your schoolwork, just across the board. So it really is something that, where we might get a little anxious, a little down. When we have a disorder, we can't function the way we used to. It's really impairing us. So that's one of the key features there. And it doesn't really resolve. You try to make some changes, you try to do some things, and you're still really struggling. So that's when it might be something that could be a mental health concern. Or maybe you just need more help with self-care. So we're going to talk about self-care, what to do. And it might be, no matter what I do, I just can't stick to this plan. And I really want to, I really need to. So those are all types of things where you might say, maybe I want to go get a therapist or get some mental health services. And we'll talk about that too. So what are some possible mental health concerns that we might see in our staff or in ourselves that we would want to address? And there's lots of different things, but I'm just going to hit the big ones, So, and I won't read all of this stuff to you on the slide. You can take a look at it. But one of the things is major depressive disorder. So again, instead of just being a little down once in a while or, what have you, major depressive disorder really affects us in lots of ways. Like I mentioned, it can make you feel like you're not thinking clearly, your appetite's off, your sleep's off, you're tired, cranky, maybe feeling guilty. And one of the big red flags that we'd be concerned about is if people are thinking about hurting themselves or not wanting to live anymore. That can go along with the major depressive episode. So one of the key features of major depressive episode is it's like in a 2-week period or longer. So like I said, sometimes we'll have a bad day, we'll have this, but kind of bounce back. With major depressive disorder, when you're having one of those episodes, it goes on for days and days and even into weeks. And it's not something you can just easily just shake off, and not acknowledge. So now generalized anxiety disorder, we all talk about being anxious or this or that, but generalized anxiety disorder, this is when the person just can't stop worrying. They just worry. So they can't make a decision because what about this? And if I do this, this might happen, or, just edgy. They're tired because they're just constantly in that stressed out mode. And so they feel tired, irritable, and they might even start to feel like their body hurts. They're so tense that they start getting stomach issues and headaches and their back hurts. And, and these can be based in just them being so tense and anxious. And it's an anxiety, they can't turn it off. They just can't just say, oh, I'm going to go home and relax and watch TV. They can't, they try to, they want to, but it's just the thoughts are still going. They're still stressed. So. And then this is what we were just talking about, the vicarious trauma. There's also post-traumatic stress disorder. And I do think that people at times will say, oh, I have PTSD, or not even say they have it like diagnosed, but to kind of self-diagnose. And who's to say if they do or they don't, trauma is trauma. But the actual diagnosis of PTSD is when, you've been exposed to either actual or threatened death. So the person really thinks they're either going to get killed, really hurt, or there's been some kind of sexual violence. So the thing to keep in mind is that this can be something that you actually experience has happened to you. You might have witnessed it. You might have seen something like this happen, or somebody really close to you, this happened to you. So it doesn't even have to be that it happened to you, but it really traumatized you that you heard about this, saw it, or experienced it. And so what happens, and some people are more resilient than others. Some people can have these horrible things happen and they don't like it, but they can still function. They don't really develop these other symptoms. Other people do. So for PTSD, you've gone through something like this, and then they experience intrusions and symptoms. So they can't, they'll have nightmares about it. They will dissociate. They're very reactive to any triggers that bring back that memory. They can have a lot of physical reactivity to certain triggers. And then they start trying to really go out of their way to avoid things that bring back the trauma. So like in a library employee, if they had a really horrible interaction with a patron, they may not want to come to work anymore, or they may not want to work in that particular area, or patrons that look like that particular person. So really just trying to avoid anything that reminds them of that. And then similar to their vicarious trauma, their mood and the way they view the world is just different because of this. So they don't like themselves, the world, they're just feel really just everything's horrible. They're always scared, horrified, shame is there, not really interested in things they used to, can't really attach to people the way they used to. And then just feeling really reactive. So these are people that, because of the trauma, they might be really reactive. They might flash out, when they really maybe don't seem like they should, but to them, they might act out if you say certain things or do certain things. They might be more self-destructive than they used to be, startle easily, all of those things. And so somebody has this for more than a month, we would start to be concerned about something like PTSD and needing some treatment for that. So those are some of the big issues. There's lots of different things that people can have, but those are the things that could turn into a mental health challenge. So what we want to talk about with the self-care is how can we address that? How can we do things to really try to take care of ourselves, to do the best we can to address any conditions that we may have, or to avoid things like burnout, vicarious trauma. So, and before I get into the self-care aspect, is there any questions anybody has about the things that we talked about, kind of distinguishing burnout, vicarious trauma, mental disorders, and everything? Everybody's a unique individual. It's going to present differently in different people. But these are some of the things that you might kind of look for, if you're concerned about wanting to offer some help to your staff, or if you need help for yourself. So, okay. We're just going to talk about self-care for a little bit. So this is the fun part. So what do we do to take care of ourselves? And so one thing is just to realize, how do you experience stress? Everybody's different. So, how do you feel when you're stressed out? So starting to be tuned in to different signs for that. And how do you deal with it? So like maybe, when I'm stressed, I know that I kind of want to be by myself. Sometimes my appetite's not the best. I start to feel real tense in my body. So I'm like, yeah, I got to start taking better care of myself. I got to start making some adjustments here and dealing with it. So we all have some healthy skills and some unhealthy skills. So, one thing to be vigilant in yourself is, do you get so stressed that you start gravitating towards more of the things that aren't really good for you? So we can deal with stress, have a stressful day, and we could say, you know what, I'm going to go walk around the block and get some fresh air and get some movement. Or we could say, I'm going to eat a pint of ice cream and watch Netflix. So, we have two different choices, and I know which one I want to do, but it's probably not the best choice, So just realizing that and trying to prompt ourselves into some healthier actions. And then really think about, what is stressing us out? What is this? And what can I do about it? I can't just keep, trying to, deal with the aftermath of it. I had to start really saying, what can I take control of? What can I prioritize? What can go to the wayside? What needs to be dealt with now? What can be dealt with later? And just being more proactive. I did find this self-care assessment tool online. It's from the University of Buffalo School of Social Work. They've got a lot of good resources, but it's just an assessment tool. It doesn't give you like a score or anything like that, but it does give you an idea of, what are you currently doing in terms of these different aspects of self-care: psychological, physical, emotional, spiritual, and just like looking for patterns, like, what am I doing in this area, but not doing in this area? So maybe I need to do more here. This is healthy, but this isn't healthy. And just gives you a chance to kind of sit down and really look at it and think about what you're doing or not doing before you even start trying to do anything in particular, just taking stock of where you're at. And this is something you can share with your staff too, and say, hey, why don't we all do this? Take a look at this and see how you're doing. So there's things we can do in our personal life with our self-care for all the different aspects. Exercise. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an athlete, an Olympic athlete, but just doing something a little bit physical every day. just being mindful of our diets. It's not always going to be perfect, but trying to work in some healthy foods there and that we're being nourished and healthy. Make sure that we take advantage of our family and friends, but, get support from them, that they're there to spend time with. Got to get our sleep. That's essential. Got to stay hydrated. And then pampering, especially those of us that are in a leadership position, we think about others first. And so think about yourself too, and maybe make that time to do something that's really special and indulgent, for you. Have a hobby. So I've recently just started cross stitching again. I know it's not the most exciting whirlwind activity, but I enjoy it. It's my time to just kind of do just cross stitch. Don't think about anything else. So that's a hobby I've rediscovered and enjoy. And so thinking about things you enjoyed before you became a library leader, what did you do, for fun when you were in high school and in college and different things? And what do you want to get back into? Spirituality, we got to make time for that. Mindfulness is a great activity. I used to have slides on here, but it was just too much. But I'm sure you've all heard of mindfulness. You can Google a million things about how to do that, but it's a great skill to work on. But one of the things I like to do is just to be bored. I just want time to not do anything. And so, sometimes you got to plan that. You got to plan that I'm going to be bored for the next half hour. I'm not going to do anything. And then, no phone, no nothing. And maybe you just sit there and pet your cat or your dog and you just don't do anything, and that's okay. So it doesn't always have to be an activity to be self-care. Now in the workplace, this is what we're kind of interested in here, like for ourselves and our staff, is one thing is to really be respectful of your own time, come to work on time and leave on time, so that there's that work and personal life separation. Make it clear that what times you're available and what times you're not. So one thing you can do is use your email auto respond and your voicemail message to say, these are the hours I'm going to check this. These are the hours I'm not going to check it, so that people know. And, so one thing too is like you can respond to an email, but you don't have to send it right away. So you don't want people to always think, oh, she's available 24/7, because you're not. So you might go ahead and take care of it, but don't even send it, schedule it to send it like on a work hours, so people don't have that perception of you as just sitting around waiting to respond to emails. And schedule time to check your email during the day. If you have it on all day long, it's very distracting. It's hard to really focus on what you're doing. And so having times during the day when you stop, check your email, respond to that, and then go back to other things that you're doing, that can really help you do really just focusing on one task at a time. And that's a form of mindfulness there, is to really just have all your attention on one thing. So, minimizing that distraction from your email. Also your phone too. You can say, I'm only going to check my phone. I'm going to let it go to voicemail. I'm going to check it and respond to calls at certain times during the day, because that's fine. Doing the one task at a time. Having really good boundaries is going to help you too. So whether it be with patrons or coworkers, we want to be friendly, approachable. That's all good. But there has to be that professional boundary so that, when you're there, you're not the patron's friend, you're their librarian. And your coworkers, we have friendships with coworkers, but still, having some boundaries and separation between work and personal life is good. Working in those daily breaks. So, you could sit at your desk all day, every day and still not get it done. So make those times for a break. It's not, you can only do what you can do. So maybe even setting an alarm and getting up and walking around a little bit, getting in some steps, making sure you get those breaks away from your desk. Leaving for lunch. You don't even have to go out to lunch, but pack something and just physically leave the library to go and just have that time to yourself and come back refreshed is good. And you have to use your PTO. It's there to keep you healthy, keep you refreshed, and encourage your staff to use their PTO as well. And just saying no. So that's hard to do. It's easier said than done. But one thing that you can do is let people know that, you're always interested in hearing about ideas for collaboration. You love to help your coworkers, but that sometimes you're going to tell them no. And that's your way of taking care of yourself. So they're free to ask you and you're free to say no. So just kind of having that out there with people. So the work-life balance, so there's not really any one right balance. It's not like this is the right way, this is the wrong way. Some people love to work and they get a lot out of it, and that's fine. And other people would prefer more of a balance. So it's really whatever works for you. But think about what could be some barriers for that work-life balance and how are you going to address it? So especially as you go up, in your career and you're getting to a supervisory position, what have you, there's more and more pressures on your time. And so it's really easy to have that take over your personal life too. So you can think about, how are you going to address these different things that might interfere with that work-life balance and have a plan there for that. And think about, what role you can have in your organizational culture to really reward people for having a healthy work-life balance. Sometimes the people that work the most and get the most stressed out, they seem to get the rewards. They get the promotion, they get the recognition, but sometimes we just need to make sure that we're really recognizing staff that are taking good care of themselves and that they're modeling a healthy work-life balance, and just acknowledge that that's good that they're doing that and that we know that, we recognize that. So how can you kind of make some of these changes that we're talking about, some of the self-care tips, it seems like overwhelming, like, oh gosh, I got to do all these things. But really, in psychology, we use a term called shaping. So if you want to get somebody to do a certain behavior that they don't really want to do, you just reinforce little steps towards that, little by little by little, until they're doing the full behavior. So that could be like learning a dance step, or, getting into an exercise routine, so maybe if somebody does it for 5 minutes, they get reinforced, and then 10 minutes, 15, 20. So you're just building up to that full behavior instead of demanding that it be there right away. Same with our self-care, just focus on one thing that you want to change. Maybe you say, I like that email idea. I'm going to start trying that, so try that and keep doing it until it becomes a pattern. So it becomes something you don't even have to think about. And then you say, well, maybe I'm going to do this other thing now. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try walking 15 minutes every day. So just adding one thing at a time, doing it little by little until it becomes, to where it's what you want to be doing for yourself. And then reward yourself when you make healthy choices. So, be good to yourself and recognize it and build in some rewards, whatever is rewarding for you, so, that you can encourage yourself to keep doing these positive things. This is another resource we have here. This is the My Maintenance Self-Care Work Plan worksheet. This one's really nice because it gives you a chance to go through and really, really say, these are the things I don't want to do. These are the things I'm going to do instead. And so by putting it down on paper, it makes it more real. You can kind of have more accountability to yourself. Maybe if you have a friend or a coworker that wants to do this too, you guys can kind of, coach each other through it and kind of make this plan and say, this is what we're going to do. But it helps to put it in writing and really make a commitment to doing these different things. And this worksheet too, again, lets you see what are some barriers, what are you going to do to overcome that? So anticipate that it's not going to go perfectly, and what are you going to do when that happens? So we also want to support our staff and their wellness. So we have to do these things for ourselves. For our staff, one thing we can do is just really be an active listener. Just, sometimes people just want you to listen. And it sounds easier said than done. As a psychologist, they had to train us how to do this, so I didn't know anything about this when I was first in graduate school. And you think you just listen. But when you're listening, you're not thinking about other things. You're really listening to what this person's saying. And then you can reflect back to them what they said. What did you hear them say? So that they really understand that you heard what they're saying to you. And then you're trying to foster this culture of safety and inclusion, that it's okay for people to come and talk to you about things. It's okay if people want to say, maybe they have something like depression or anxiety, that it's okay to talk about those things, and that that's not something that they're going to be shamed about or judged about. If they're struggling, they're like, my life is so stressful, I can't get my work done. We're not going to say, well, you better work harder, you better figure this out. We're going to say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's think about what we could do. Let's, I understand this happens, and it's okay to talk about. And then you're modeling that good self-care. So the things that we've talked about, you're modeling that for them. So, you're getting out and you're walking and you're, taking your PTO and you're, being mindful in how you're handling things. You're not being reactive about things as they come up. You're open to talk and listen. So they're seeing that you're doing this and you're setting the tone for your library. You can do walking meetings. So if people want to talk to you, get up, so let's walk around and talk about it. It's more relaxing for them. They're getting some physical activity. So that's one of those small things you can do just to kind of change the dynamic when people want to come and talk to you. And then check in with them. Maybe people don't want to come to you, but just, it doesn't have to be, are you depressed? Are you anxious? You can just say, how's your workload? How are you feeling about that? Are you feel like you're doing okay with everything? What are some places you might want some support? Are there some coworkers that you feel like you'd like to offer support to? And just kind of checking in with them and how things are going. And then problem solve. Maybe you have somebody that comes to you and says, I gotta take care of my kids and this and this and this. Well, let's think, what are some things that are keeping you from doing that? And what could we restructure maybe at work so that you're not experiencing burnout? Or maybe you're continuing to have some real stressful interactions with patrons. What could we do to problem solve that and to provide some supports there? And then again, make sure they're using their PTO. They don't want, sometimes people feel bad, like if I leave, so-and-so has to cover. So that should never be the case if at all possible. So making sure that they understand that the library is going to function, but they need to take their time off, take care of themselves. And again, being non-judgmental. So if they come to you, maybe they've had a performance issue, they had a real bad interaction with a patron, it didn't go well, or they're calling in late all the time. Just really being objective about what it is, and then how you can support them in that and what can be done, to help with that situation. If there's any flexibility, any wiggle room in schedules, people appreciate that. It really helps them to get other things done that they need to do and balance that out with work when possible. Again, recognizing people that are having that healthy work-life balance, let them know that you notice and it's encouraging, and setting a good example. The boundaries, we have to have clear boundaries. One thing is when people may or may not come and talk to you about their personal concerns or, their stress level, or if they're struggling with mental illness. But, if they do, you want to remember that you're not a counselor, you're not their friend, that you want to make sure that you stay in that role as their supervisor, but that you're going to help connect them with some resources, that you're glad they came to you. You can help them, but not yourself. You're going to refer them out and get them some help. So you're advocating, for their wellness in the institution. Is the institution supporting what they need, and what can you do to make their work environment as positive as possible? And again, connecting them to resources, being aware of what's available for them and connecting them with those resources if they need it. So mental health services, that's kind of reaching my last 10 minutes here. I'm going to zip through here a little bit. One thing is to know if your employer offers an employee assistance program. Most people do. So that's usually a few sessions that the person can go to a counselor at no charge. So make sure you're aware if you have that. Use it for yourself if you need it. Make sure your staff know about it. But also you can go to your primary care doctor and they can refer you to a provider. So maybe you're like, what, I need a counselor. Go see your doctor and they can refer you to a provider, or you can even contact your insurance provider and they'll tell you who's in your area, who's in your network, and help you get set up with that. So those are all ways that you or your staff could get connected with a provider. There is a Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which means that there is a federal law that, insurance companies have to provide coverage for mental health issues at the same level as they would physical. So that in terms of co-pays and coverage, so that way you don't have to worry about, is this covered? So insurance companies are mandated to cover mental health issues. So that is something that's covered by your insurance policy. So if you do decide to go to counseling, what to expect. The first time you call, they're going to just get some basic information, match you with the best therapist. If you don't have insurance or you just don't want to file it, you can ask for a reduced fee. So some therapists will offer to see you at a lower rate than what they would typically charge. So it's okay to ask for that. And your first visit, you just kind of talk, they get your background information and they form a treatment plan. So your first visit, you're not really doing treatment so much as them getting to know you and figure out what the plan's going to be. And then usually you'll go to counseling weekly, if possible, if the therapist has availability, if you can make it. And then as you're doing better, feeling better, less frequently until maybe you don't need to go at all. And just know that therapy is not a quick fix. It's something that takes time. You have to build the relationship, practice the skills they're talking to you about. It takes time over the long term. And whatever you share with your counselor is confidential and protected by HIPAA. And if you do see a counselor, so an LCSW, LPC, or a psychologist, we don't prescribe medication. So you have to see a medical doctor or a psychiatrist if you feel like you might need medication. They would have to be the ones you would see there. These are just some national mental health resources that you can look at for yourself, or if you want to share them with your staff. Some additional readings. Lots of things. Okay, so I got to the end. There was a lot to throw at you, but I wanted to make sure that we had a good 10 minutes or so that we could talk. Somebody put in here about Blue Cross Blue Shield, the state plan, that there are some therapists who have no copay. That's right. That's right. So whatever insurance you have, you may have a copay, but it should be no more than if you went to see your family doctor. And some don't have any copays at all. So now I'm interested to hear about what you all might think. We have a few minutes here, as far as library leaders, what are your thoughts on things that you can do? What have you tried to do as far as supporting your own self-care, supporting your staff self-care? Are there things you're still kind of wondering about or not sure about? Just kind of throw it open there. And you can unmute yourself and speak if you want, or you can put it in the chat. Let's see. Oh, so somebody said, okay, let's see. Pull my chat up here. Oh, yeah. So missing lunch twice, so that's not good, right? So whatever, kind of taking a look at that and figuring out how you can make sure that you always get that break every day, and that's not to stress you out more by saying you have to do it, but that it's important and that you're going to restructure for that. Navigating the news has been challenging. Yeah. So just, I think, there's a lot of volatile topics. A lot of people have different political opinions, and there's all kinds of different, just simple things can be uncomfortable because we're not sure where people stand on different issues. But again, just that active listening. If somebody comes to you and they want to talk about what they heard on the news, that you're not debating with them, or, well, I think, you can just listen and say, sounds like this is stressing you out, or it sounds like you're not quite sure how this, what your coworkers might think about this, or sounds like you might want to know more about, it sounds like a hokey as I say that, but, you're basically just letting them talk, that you're not trying to necessarily throw your opinion out there, but just to listen to what are they saying behind, they're talking about the news, but what are they concerned about? What is the concern behind that they're trying to communicate? Yeah. So that working late, somebody said they work late, so they took a longer lunch. So you're flexing that out for yourself. Yeah. Mindfulness. Yeah. Yeah. And so Gregory says for a more fulfilling and rewarding career. That's the goal, right? So then maybe, is there anybody here that's more new to the profession? Because when I first joined the profession, I wasn't, really sure what to expect. And so I didn't always understand that there would be all these different pressures to do things. And, and they don't really prepare you for that in library school, all the different types of stress you might experience. So that's something that, for those of us that are newer to the profession, it's kind of an adjustment, too. And some people, I'm not in a leadership role, but some people I know have gotten into libraries and immediately they're in a leadership role, and that's a little bit stressful too. Yeah. Oh, balancing working and motherhood. Yeah, that's always a challenge. Yeah, taking lunch every day. I used to be bad about that, and I do that every day now. Yeah. Yeah. So 5 Good Minutes book series by Dr. Jeffrey Brantley from Duke Integrated Medicine. Okay, yeah, bit size. That's what we're talking about, shaping a behavior, bit-sized pieces. You don't have to be a guru all of a sudden. You can kind of just do a little bit here and there and see how it makes you feel. If you're like, wow, I feel better. I did that for 5 minutes and I feel better. Great, keep doing it. Yeah, so that sounds like a popular book, The 5 Good Minutes. Okay, it's a good one. You can share that with your staff too. So, make sure that they know that's there. And if they want to try that, they can, get a copy and look at it. Okay. I'm glad I got to spend some time with all of you today and share some information on this. And if you ever want to get in touch with me, feel free. You've got my email, so I can do that. I'll stop my share.
Thank you so much, Dawn.
Yeah.
Great resources also shared in the chat, and you'll have the slides, you'll have the recording, and access to the chat afterwards if you want to go back and find any of those. But yeah, thank you so much, Dawn, for your time and expertise, and thank you all for being here and sharing your time with us today. So yeah, let's all go outside and take a moment and take ourselves before we get back to work.
All right. Well, everybody have a good weekend. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.